Welcome to Neon Galactic, a production of Keat TV in Eureka, California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. As a civilization, as a species, we are just now embarking on what will likely be a revolution in the way we think about the world and the greater universe due to an ongoing encounter with aspects of reality that have long stayed hidden in the shadows. After centuries of thinking that if we just looked deep enough into the mechanics of the material world, at the gnashing and fundamental belts and gears that we've assumed underlie this clockwork universe, we've hoped that the answers to every scientific and philosophic question would be answered by those observations. Yet here we are now at what seems the most advanced moment in recollected human history, and we're just now finding out, due to a continued confrontation with things and potentially entities beyond our ken, that all of our pride and self-congratulations are premature at best. Our guest today is Dr. James Madden, a Benedictine College philosophy professor, and we're here to talk about his new book, Unidentified Flying Hyperobject, UFOs, Philosophy, and the End of the World. In this book, Madden argues that the material universe of perception may only be that slice of reality that humanity has come to know and occupy due to our innate cognitive processes and other limitations of mind. His book argues that perhaps in order to confront the most profound mysteries, UFOs, alien intelligence, life after death, consciousness, we need to understand that our view of the world is a finite perspective, one that leaves whole vistas of the universe untouched and ignored by the human mind. A link to both the book and my review of the book can be found in the description. By analyzing and expanding on the theories of Jacques Vallee, Jeffrey Kripal, and Diana Pasulka, while also reaching back and recontextualizing the philosophical notions we've inherited from such ancients as Plato and Aristotle, Madden arrives at a new place where many of the self-applied limits in our thinking may finally be overcome. Welcome, Mr. Madden.
Thank you. This is a great honor. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the review you wrote of the book too. You really got it right. So
well, I appreciate that, and the review was really a function of me just trying to grok the book. I mean, I took a lot of notes, and then I'm sitting there thinking, I have all this material. I should do something so I can crystallize it for myself, and then also right. Let other people know what I think about it, which I think it's an amazing piece of work. So. Congratulations on a good week. I hear that it's the #1 on the UFO side of Amazon's book sales.
It's been bouncing back with Diana Pasulka's book, right? Which is right and good because, but the book has done very, very well its first week out, and I'm a little amazed by all that. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are really interested in what you've had to say. And you're right at the right moment. I mean, this is a moment where maybe there's an awakening going on, and that's why I think partly your book is so well timed. I have a bunch of questions. I mean, there's so much in your book to cover that I wanted to try and sort of narrow it down to some topics that we could sort of break into with the limited time. But first off, I mean, the most organic question is, was there an epiphany or a moment of inspiration where you got the idea for the book, or was it more just a natural outgrowth of your study of work like Pasulka's and whatnot?
Sure. I mean, so I mentioned this in the introduction to the book that, I was not really a UFO, I was not terribly interested in the UFO until relatively recently, really 2019, 2020, 2021. When the New York Times article came out, and then a lot of the stuff that was on like Joe Rogan and things like that got me interested, and then in 2021 when a lot of revelations from the Pentagon started coming and all that, it intrigued me, and then I start looking into it, and then I discovered Vallee, and I discovered Pasulka, more importantly, because you have someone who's trained in the humanities, trained in philosophy, who's doing this. And at the same time, I'm writing another book. I actually had another book come out just this week. Wow. On philosophy of mind. Yeah. And I was struck by how the kind of philosophy of mind that I was doing really resonated with the UFO topic. Okay. And I have a rule, before I write anything, I always ask myself, does the world need to hear this? And does the world need to hear it from Jim Madden? Right. Because if the world doesn't need to hear it, then it's just my own sort of self-indulgence that I'm doing. And if they don't need to hear it from me, then I should find someone else who can do it better than I can. But I had the sense that, no, I had these ideas that were really going to like play well in helping with the UFO topic. And that's really what moved me to write about it, not just to inquire into it. And I began teaching a course about it. which got me going. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm real curious. I haven't read your other book, but what is that philosophy of mind? Not to get too far afield, but I'm fascinated how they might play into each other.
The other book is called Thinking About Thinking.
Mhm.
And the point, and actually, if you read my Unidentified Flying Hyperobject, the first chapter is drawing a lot of the much more detailed machinery of the philosophy of mind book.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that, and this isn't me necessarily, there's a whole tradition in phenomenology and cognitive science that will make the case that human minds are enabled by the way they're limited.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That what lets us cognize about a world is that we limit the amount of the world that we can cognize, right?
Sure.
And we have very specific human ways of limiting our cognition so that it becomes manageable, right? Through things like social conformity and social interaction, through emotional attachment, through technological extension, which cut the world down to size so that we can manage it and thereby make it an object of our cognition. But that has at the same time, the bug of that feature is that means there's a whole lot out there that is just unavailable to us because we get a hold of things by actually limiting what we get a hold of.
Yeah. That's fascinating, and it sort of resonates with Donald Hoffman's work about the evolutionary. We basically evolved to, focus on what we need to survive rather than all the other information that may be streaming by us and that we're entirely missing. What you were just talking about, I think you capture in the term Umwelt in the book. I mean, not to jump, we're going to be jumping all over the place because there's a lot I want to cover. But can you talk a little bit about that, the Umwelt and its correspondingly transcendent shadow, the Uber Umwelt? It's derived from other previous endeavors. Can you sort of talk about the roots of it and how it applies to the UFO topic?
The person who really turned me on to the notion of Umwelt was
Umwelt.
Andy Clark, who's a cognitive scientist, philosopher of mind, who's alive and well today. And he's drawing on it from the early 20th century phenomenological tradition, and you can find it in early 20th century behavioral biology. But the notion of an Umwelt, literally in German, would mean around world. It's often translated as environment. I want to be careful with that because for us, environment has certain other connotations now.
Yeah.
But Clark makes his point using a certain example, and I think the example really nails it. So I'm going to just draw on Clark's example. And he talks about there's a certain kind of tick. And the entire sensory apparatus of that tick is exhausted by, it has a sense for the amount of mammalian skin acid in its immediate surroundings. It can track differences in heat, and it can sense surface pressure. Okay. And this really limited sense package is very effective for this tick so that it can time its jump on you while you're walking by the plant that it's sitting on and get more or less to the spot where there's a vein, and then it knows when it gets there and it can stick its poker in there and drink your blood, okay, all that. And now think of it now. So, and all that tick is aware of about you is your surface, the tension on your skin, the heat that you're emitting, and the acid your skin emits. That's all it gets. Okay. That's its whole world. That is all that's available to it. It has limited the world. It has framed the world in just those sensory capacities. And that's all that it will ever be aware of. Now it's getting you right. You do have skin acid, you do have heat you emit, there is a tension on your skin, all that. But there's a vast array of other properties, attributes that you have that tick is aloof to, because that's just not what it was designed to sense. Okay. So this packaging of the world that's available to something through its sensory, apparatus that it's evolved to deal with, we call the Umwelt. It's a round world. I call all the world that's beyond the Umwelt of an organism, it's Uber Umwelt, the over or super or beyond a round world. Yeah. Okay. And so I found this interesting for the UFO in that, we're no different than the tick. Like, we have a certain sensory package that we evolved in interaction with the environment that sorts the environment for us, that its features it leaves behind more than it includes. Okay. Which then tells us that there's a vast Uber Umwelt for us that's out there that we're completely aloof to, because we just simply did not, we were not evolved or designed to deal with it. Okay. And then for me, it then isn't entirely surprising that very uncanny things occasionally show up when we sort of hit something that's on the periphery of our Umwelt, that's out there in the Uber Umwelt, that we occasionally encounter that we weren't designed to encounter. We might call that alien. We might call that uncanny. You might call that paranormal, all those things. Right. I think once you get that notion of the Umwelt and our natural enablement through limitation in our cognition, it does, suggest that there's going to be a vast Uber Umwelt, a vast world of unseen things for us. And I would then say we would expect that they would show up on the edges of what's intelligible to us.
Yeah. It seems that if you follow that principle, down the line, you start to look for more of the patterns and what those encounters may be telling us about the meta structure, rather than focusing on the individual details of the colored lights or the chrome finish or any of that kind of stuff. It's like all of those things might be just letters or words in a broader communication from this other side. Is that fair to say?
Right. Or, yeah, I agree with that 100%. Or it could be, as soon as we hit something, we bump into something that we weren't evolved to deal with, we're going to put it into categories that we were evolved to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, that might be why, for some people that when they run into this, they see the Blessed Mother, and other people, they run into it, they see a UFO. Okay. Because you've gone beyond the bounds of the normal limitations of human cognition in this perceptual event. And so now we're scrambling for categories to put it into. And I think we might say, none of them are right, none of them are wrong. They're just the best we can do at the moment. Right. And this, to me, I think it helps us understand the extreme difficulty of the UFO problem, in that if indeed this is something that we were not involved to work with, okay, how we'll even make progress in understanding it is an interesting question, because on my hypothesis, it is something that is beyond the regular human apparatus for dealing with the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are several names for the Uber Umwelt. I mean, you mentioned Magonia in your book, which of course is Jacques Vallee's famous, borrowing of that term from fairy lore and whatnot. But there's also, like you mentioned, Jeffrey Kripal's supernature. There are lots of constructions where that sort of is the operative kind of notion. But it seems like for American society, or human society, to take that seriously, we're going to need a fundamental humbling in order for people to even be open to the idea that we're just operating because we're an arrogant species and we've come this far materialistically. So we think that we're only, as we've always thought, that we're only a few brushstrokes away from having a true and full handle on the nature of everything. I mean, what do we need in order to disabuse us of that notion and to finally realize that maybe that we're only on our own particular blade of grass rather than in the actual essential universe?
I think this is the essential message of the UFO encounter, right? It is. The news is in, humanism is over. Right?
Wow.
Merleau-Ponty, Merleau-Ponty is a 20th century French phenomenologist that I admire quite a bit. And he talks about, and he's in this tradition of enablement through limitation that I talk about in cognition. And he says in a very important paper of his, he talks about how, what does he call it? He calls it the vulgar humanism of our ancestors is no longer sustainable, right? And I think the UFO is a very good concrete instance of showing us why the vulgar humanism of many of our ancestors, especially since the Enlightenment, is over now, right? Because it does seem that there's something else. There's something else on the edge of our ability to even comprehend it that is out there and may well, for all we know, be running things, right?
Yeah.
The tick that jumps on you has no clue of how much you transcend that tick in your various powers and capacities, right?
Yeah. Well,
likewise, whatever thing we're bumping into the Uber Umwelt, we may have no idea how far that transcends us, right? So I think the great thing about the UFO is I think it helps to re-enchant nature, right? It helps us to see that there's a nature out there that isn't just what is mechanically available to us. And in doing that, it cannot help but humble us at a time I think humans need to be humbled.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that the present, social, political situation all over the world is crying out for, to knock humans down a peg. You mentioned the vulgar humanism of our ancestors, and one of the things that your book does really well is talk about and contextualize sort of our current notions, both where we've been and where we're going in relation to Plato and Aristotle. One of the questions I was left with after reading your book was, have we just fundamentally misread Plato and Aristotle? I mean, like, we've taken a lot from their theories and ideas, and we've used some of them to construct what we consider the edifice of modern human intellectual endeavor. But I mean, you're going back and saying, well, maybe not those ideas as much as these other ideas, or am I totally misreading it?
No, I like what you're saying.
Okay.
I often tell my students Plato was not a Platonist. Okay. Meaning a lot of times that sort of philosophy 101 caricature that you got, just using Plato's example of Plato, actually has very little to do with what the guy was actually up to.
Yeah.
Right. And using, once again, Plato as an example, when you read a Platonic dialogue, there's always a question of whose voice is Plato's, if any of the voices in it. Right. And we tend to read, just using Plato's example, we tend to read Plato entirely through the lens of the Republic, or maybe one or two other dialogues. Right. Whereas, Plato himself goes on to write the Timaeus as a necessary sequel to the Republic. So we have no right to really comment on the Republic unless we're commenting on the Timaeus.
Because it's a body of work, right? I mean,
it's a body of work, yeah. And I think a similar thing with Aristotle too. And I think a lot of contemporary scholarship will support this, is like, we've come to think of Plato and Aristotle as sort of, that they broke up, like the Beatles broke up in a huff, right? Okay. But they didn't, right? I mean, Aristotle, he didn't leave the academy till Plato was dead, right? And, basically left because of the inheritance issues, okay? And I think we should see that these two people were involved in a common project that emphasized different things, but it was a common project, right? And I think in Aristotle's case in particular, there's a tendency to think of him as, and I think there's good reason to think, like all complex thinkers have different moods, and those moods lead to different tracks among their followers. But we think of Aristotle as, sort of like the source of humanism in a lot of ways, and like the source of scientism in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I show you in the book some pretty spooky passages from Aristotle, right? Where he seemed to be open to other modes of experience, and he rejected the mythology in a certain way, but he was open to a more primordial mythic experience. So I think really we should look at how spooky and woo-woo the roots of our own Western tradition are.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So I think we have made them a little too safe, right? For conventional thinking. I think if we really look at what these people are up to, we don't have to look outside of our traditions to find something that's very open to being open.
One of the things that you quote in in your book is the Aristotle's notion of sort of the cosmogony or whatever, and I'm going to quote you here: Aristotle's universe runs on worship or interlocking hierarchies of contemplative admiration. Each level of the universe looks up to a higher order intelligence that gives intelligibility, either directly or by transitivity, to all cosmological levels below it, terminating in the being, the God, whose contemplative worthiness makes sense of the entire cosmological system. There's a metaphysic there that's like powerful, but beyond the the characters of mythology. Like, instead of Zeus with a beard, he's talking about these gigantic sort of planetary intelligences. What about that resonated with you in the writing of this book? Why did you feel the need to include that?
Yeah, I mean, a number of things. Like, so one, my invoking Aristotle there is partly my attempting to get some of my colleagues in philosophy to take the UFO seriously and to take the supernature seriously.
Well, God bless you. I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you. And also, though, it's so we want to, a lot of us, especially in academia, want to be scandalized by the notion of supernature or paranormal or the UFO or what have you.
Yeah.
To which I would say, but okay, Aristotle believed in extraterrestrial intelligence, right? I mean, and a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, he thought of the planets as intelligences. Okay. And I think we have to be careful when we say planets, though, even for Aristotle, because he doesn't think of like the moon as a giant rock that's circling the Earth.
Yeah, it's also a planet.
He thinks of the moon as a sphere, really a system.
Mm-hmm.
That is rotating around the Earth, and that system is in its functioning a kind of intelligence, right? And And what makes that system tick is its desire, right, to reach the higher level of intelligibility, which would be the next planet out, right, the next heavenly body out, which too is a system that is a kind of emergent intelligence, right, that's seeking higher and higher levels of intelligibility. Okay, so this does two kinds of work for me in the book. On the one hand, it shows that the notion of supernature, the notion of intelligence that transcends us, even extraterrestrial intelligence, is not new. It's a deeply part of the Western philosophical tradition. Aristotle has it. And if you read Plato's Timaeus, you can find the exact same thing going on in the Timaeus, okay? More poetically spelled out, right? But secondly, it starts to make the point that the way we might start thinking about supernature, or we might start thinking about these paranormal beings that transcend us, is not in terms of discrete objects like a rock flying around a planet, or a ghost or something like that, that's like a discrete spirit, but as systems that have taken on objective lives of their own, that operate according to principles of intelligibility, that have their own emergent kind of intelligence, right? Namely, what I'll call later in the book a hyperobject.
Yeah.
And so, though I'm not by any means defending Aristotle's cosmology, okay, right?
Yeah.
But I think the method and his notion that of how intelligibility could be an explanation in the universe, I think, is interesting to us, and I think our encounter with the UFO suggests it to us.
Yeah. The notion of a hyperobject is another stroke of genius that I thoroughly enjoyed in the book, and it kind of gave me some perspective on that. It's like, from a finite view, certain things are one, certain objects are one thing, or you define it as how it occurs in that particular moment in that particular amount of time. But a hyperobject, and correct me if I'm wrong, extends beyond what we can perceive in both space and time, and therefore is never encapsulated in whatever our individual experience of it may be. It's something larger.
Yes.
In regards to the UFO, I thought it was interesting, the point that it may be one thing, that it may be one extended hyperobject that's manifesting in all these different ways according to the perceptions of those who are perceiving it, but that it may actually be one organic whole, and that's the perspective that we miss by virtue of being a tick. Is that fair?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really well put. Really well put. Thanks, James.
No problem.
No, first of all, no, the notion of hyperobject, to be careful, is the term was coined by Timothy Morton,
Mm-hmm.
who is a very important, very brilliant ecological, philosophical thinker who's out of Rice University. Okay, and Morton is applying certain principles from what's called object-oriented ontology and develops this notion of a hyperobject in his ecological studies. Okay, and what Morton has in mind there is, the environment. Okay, he thinks you could make a case that it is a substance, or it's an object, or a being, no more or less than you and I are, or the desk in front of me is. That it has powers, it has capabilities, it acts for different reasons and things like that, no more or less than you and I do, but on a scale that is utterly transcendent to what we could comprehend. Okay, so we can see the environment in its particular manifestations, this or that tornado, this or that snowstorm, this or that sunny day. Okay, but those are all just expressions. I like to think there's like little tentacles of the hyperobject that is the environment showing up.
Yeah.
Okay. And as you put it really well, James, is a hyperobject would be something that can dip its toe into our Umwelt, but it mostly exists, vastly exists in the Uber Umwelt. So we get signals of it, right? And those little manifestations of it appear to us to be discrete one-off events. Oh, it rained today. Okay, but no, the rain is an expression of a multitudinously large phenomenon that is the environment. Okay, and so then I propose that, well, the UFO are these uncanny things that show up to us, and they appear to us in our Umwelt as discrete, individuated things, but really, maybe in the Uber Umwelt, these are all manifestations of a single hyperobject.
Yeah,
which would be a systematic entity.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, a couple of questions I had around that. So anything that we encounter, whether we start it or not, whether we initiate the process or not, that is bigger than us and extends beyond us in space and time, can be considered a hyperobject. my question is, does that extend that definition into meaninglessness? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's if it's anything that is bigger than us and that we don't perceive the edges of, then a lot of things are hyperobjects. And does that mean it loses its specificity, or what?
Yeah, it's a good question. And people like Morton and I think Graham Harman, who's sort of the founder of object-oriented ontology,
And you talk about him in the book.
says, even says maybe all objects are hyperobjects. Okay, because think from the tick's perspective. Like the tick, you're a hyperobject to the tick. Like the tick is only getting your skin acid and your body temperature and the surface tension of your skin, but there's a lot more to you than that, right? So you show up just as those things. Okay. And as I actually put in the book, like once you make this turn, I wonder, like, what is my desk really up to out there in the Uber Umwelt?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. Any general account of things is going to, at some level, be trivial, right? Like I'll say to my students is like the point of metaphysics is to take an exciting world and render it boring, right? Because what is metaphysics going to do? It's going to try to give you the most general account of everything under a single, like concept, right? That's the ideal of it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you that by saying the UFO is a hyperobject might then mean the UFO isn't special.
Yeah.
Okay, but to me, I love that because that's telling me my coffee cup is very special then, right? Like there are untold possibilities of all the objects in my environment now.
Yeah.
That I'm not attuned to, but maybe I could be.
Yeah.
Okay. And that for me plays in this notion that the UFO might be this very needed re-enchantment of the world for us.
Yeah. That's a point you come back to repeatedly, and I agree with that notion. One of the where is it? I have okay. So you quote Vallee talking about, or Vallee, sorry, talking about his idea to sort of attribute mind to the hyperobject that is Magonia. And then you say to make that argument requires a special leap of argumentation that we're not making in this book. You're not saying it's not happening, but that's not what you're about in the book. Right. So would you identify that as sort of a next philosophical step to sort of go into the mind aspect of whatever the Umwelt of the UFO is, or what?
Yeah, so I think there's two things to go in there. Like one, yes, I think so what do? I've as a philosopher, I'd kind of propose a broad, if not trivial, hypothesis, right? And then the next question is, what do we do, right? Well, and so really what I think the book does for future inquiries raises the question of how would we figure out something beyond the bounds of our figuring out?
Yeah.
Like how would we communicate with that which is not what we were set up to deal with? Okay. And how we do that, I don't know. But I think that is now our task. That is the task of the scientists who are getting into ufology. It's the task of the people in the humanities who are into it, the social side. I think that's all like what we all need to be doing now is, okay, there's something in the Uber Umwelt that is showing up for us, that's making contact to us, right? What the hell do we do with that? Because the problem isn't just that it speaks Chinese and we speak English. The problem is that we are ticks compared to it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I think I'm raising that issue is, if this thing is minded, how do we talk to it? Okay. Second thing I'm doing in that remark, and I think there's a footnote, kind of a snotty footnote in this in the book, is, we do that, right?
Yeah.
Is I want to be careful because this is one of the kind of a beef I have with panpsychism that's kind of very popular today in philosophy of mind is I think what happens in that view of things is there's this deep problem of how we figure out how human subjectivity could emerge from the matter in our brains. Okay. And it's
a hard problem.
The hard problem. Okay. And I have deep sympathies to panpsychism. Okay. As you can see, I cite a guy named Goff throughout the book. Okay. But what I worry is what the panpsychist does is says, well, we can't figure ourselves out, so we'll fix it by saying the whole universe is subjective like we are.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the kind of like transcendental narcissism I'm worried about. And I think the UFO can correct us on. Okay. Yeah. So I want to be careful in saying, I think the UFO has a mind, or I think the UFO has subjectivity, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying, I think the UFO must be like us. right?
Yeah.
Because I think the very thing we're hearing is it turns out the universe is not very like us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not here to be available to us in the way that we wish it would.
Well, and if you look at consciousness, I mean, that's where I think a lot of those people make those arguments from, is that, consciousness is universal. A trickle experience of consciousness could be, should be, most likely is dramatically and irrevocably different than a much broader stream of consciousness. How can we equate the two? That is a fallacy, exactly. Which I think is what you're.
And that's why I worry that if I say, the UFO is a minded hyperobject, that we're going to assume there's like a grounds for an easy empathy between us.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly the signal we're not getting.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you go into in depth in the book is technology, and it kind of goes along with the idea of hyperobjects and AI, and whether or not AI is a hyperobject sort of in the future that may be coming back to react with us or interact with us. What do you think what are your fears about AI in that regard, and what are your hopes? On one hand, it seems like AI may be the solution to some of these problems in terms of pattern recognition, figuring out ways to communicate or to grok all the data and come up with a intelligible response. That seems like it might be the solution. But on the other hand, like you argue in the book, maybe it's dehumanizing us by taking away the fundamental skills we need to actually appropriately interact with this thing.
So there's a recent episode of Kelly Chase's UFO Rabbit Hole, where Diana Pasulka and I talk.
Yes.
And Diana kind of calls me out a little bit on this one in a good way. Okay. And because I have a sort of grouchy Heideggerian Luddite streak in me.
So do I. So do I.
Yes, yeah. But also here we are. Like, you and I would not have had friendship if it were not for this machine.
Exactly right. The thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And in Diana's new book, Encounters, she has a chapter, the Moon Girl chapter, which is about someone named Simone, who was very instrumental in the development of the technologies that we enjoy today. And she is not a moody Heideggerian about this. She's very optimistic about this as a human possibility, and sees this as a grounds for enchantment, et cetera. Right. Okay. And I think really Moon Girl has moved me in a lot of ways. Okay. But and note in the subtitle to my book, I talk about the end of the world. Okay. And of course, I'm worried that we're going to nuke ourselves, and I'm worried about the environment, things like that. Okay. But I think the sense of world there that I mean is end of our Umwelt. Okay. End of the categories and the practices and the traditions and things that have provided intelligibility for our lives for a very, very long time. Okay. And of course, there's a lot of very bad things about those things. Right? Okay. I'm glad my Umwelt has changed such that we taught my daughter to read. Okay. Right. Okay. So, but also I don't know how to make sense of my life without the sort of the traditional conditions of humanity either. Okay. So as it does seem like the AI hyperobject is on the loose now. Okay, I think it is, right?
Yeah.
And we have no way of knowing what that looks like in 100 years or 10 years. Okay. But also I think like Moon Girl's right to say, how do you know it's going to be bad? Okay. Maybe there'll be something like teaching your daughter to read that's going to come out of this too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But at the same time, I can't look forward to the end of my world. I don't have to resist it, but I can't say I look forward to that.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
To realize that humanity in 2 generations will have very little in common with me.
Yeah.
Right. That I'll be rendered almost unintelligible to them. Okay. And maybe this is sort of, my own sort of like Catholic nostalgia or something like that. Right. So even though I'm not pessimistic, but I do feel the loss of the conditions of my existence.
Yeah. One of the, I keep saying one of the interesting points because there's a lot of interesting points, but you were, you're talking about the end of an Umwelt and the impact that might have on you. You can't look forward to it because it's basically the destruction of the way that you grok everything. So that's a obliteration, basically, right? An intellectual obliteration in a lot of ways. One of the things about Plato and Aristotle, they were influenced by the mystery schools. And those notions were something where there was an exoteric and an esoteric level of knowledge, right? So the exoteric was what was given to the masses in a sort of, mythologized form or a dramatized form so that they could sort of get an idea of the loose principles, but not the deep knowledge that would be unsettling or destabilizing.
Or being managed by it.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that what we're calling for now is sort of a mass, disclosure, is the esotericizing of the masses, right? Like if we're going to go out and tell everyone what the nature of true reality is, the ancients always focused on the idea of self-development before we got to the point where you received the esoteric notion. And if not, if you didn't do that, it would destroy you, was their belief, I believe. Right. Do you believe that's a risk?
Yeah. So, okay. Something that people miss is in using Plato's Republic as an example, right? Is Plato did not intend the Republic as like general education.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he says in the Republic, at least he has Socrates say in the Republic that very few people should be given this education. They shouldn't be given it till they're like 30 years old, right? The worst thing you could do would be make somebody do it, all this, right? Mm-hmm. And I think another thing to note too is for Plato, to become educated would be to be dead.
Yeah.
Like he said, philosophy is a preparation for death. In the Republic, his mythic figure only achieved enlightenment post-mortem, right? And I don't know that Plato's literally talking about death there. I don't know that he's not, okay? But it does seem like to do this, you would have to be as if dead to the everyday world.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, do I worry about like taking the esoteric and making it exoteric and like the consequences of that? Okay, I'm not terribly worried about that because I don't think it'll work. Okay. I think
that's a good point.
And I'm going to sound like a snob here, okay, but the vast majority of human beings are not like people like you and me who like to talk about this and can't stop thinking about it and will define our lives by it. Think of like, the most successful podcast of this sort will barely scratch the surface of the general public, right?
Yeah.
Because I think what we have now is we're not going to take the esoteric and make it exoteric. I think we have just more ways of connecting the people who are capable of esotericism.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I people, you'll hear them say, the president can get on TV and disclose, and then pretty much everybody would just say, oh, hum, and go back, turn the channel to the next reality show or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's true, right? I think most people are only able to like sort of frame things in the Umwelt, and they're not really concerned about what's going on beyond that, right? So, and especially like because as you know, I'm not a huge fan of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, right? And I think that's what that is, just a very easy way to package this that doesn't require us to think very hard about it, right? And so I don't think disclosure will really make much of a difference for most people, because I think most people are, as they've always been, mostly fairly satisfied to be in the cave.
Yeah. I think that's, largely true. Most people are like, does it affect how I pay my bills? Does it turn the coffee on in the morning? And if no and no, then there's not much that they can do about it or will think about it. So a point that you made that I wanted to ask you about that I thought was really dramatic and something that I hadn't considered before is the idea of Jacques Vallee as sort of an Oppenheimer figure. I know you're not directly saying he is Oppenheimer, but there is that relationship between potentially the destruction of the Umwelt and things that he's started in his intellectual life. Can you expound upon that and how you came to that notion?
Sure.
And
of course, I'm writing that chapter last summer while the Oppenheimer craze is happening.
Yeah, I figured as much, right? Luckily, you didn't call him Barbie. You could have called him Barbie, and it would have been all of it.
Jacques Vallee is the Ken of our era, right? Oppenheimer famously, says, when he sees the Trinity test, behold, I am death, destroyer of worlds, like quoting the Hindu text.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like Oppenheimer had this sense, that he just couldn't help but do this thing. Like he was being pushed by forces greater than himself to make the bomb.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he saw, but I'm ending the world here, right? Like I'm letting loose a Promethean hyperobject that we will not be able to control ultimately.
Yeah.
So he has that irony built into him, right? And when you read Vallee's most recent co-authored book, Oppenheimer is a figure in that book.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I thought was interesting. And it's called Trinity, and it's named for the Trinity test. Okay. And the Vallee is really closely linking the UFO phenomena to the Trinity test, right? Not just in the event he's depicting in the book, but just in general. Okay.
Yeah.
And it got me to thinking, well, Vallee was, there are certain moments in the book, and I quote them in my book, where Vallee talks about how digital technology is going to sort of overcome humanity as thinking animals. It's going to overcome us as, animals that are concerned about the meaning of our lives and things like that. He has those Heideggerian worries, whether he's reading Heidegger or not. He's got the same kind of Heideggerian worry about technology. And it got me to think, but wait, as I've been told, Jacques Vallee was a very important figure in bringing about the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so then it feels to me like Vallee is then saying, behold, I am death, the destroyer of worlds, right? In a similar way that Oppenheimer's. And I'm not saying like Jacques Vallee has had that conscious thought, but I'm seeing him as like an archetype of the Oppenheimer type, right?
Yeah.
And
kind of a Promethean thing, I mean, a Promethean role,
Yeah, like he's like this Promethean, like this instance of the Promethean archetype, right?
Yeah.
Where and I see him as like this really rich expression of the irony of human existence, right? That we are driven to do this thing that is great for us, but we know it's going to undo us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet now the UFO is showing up and saying, could you rethink that, guys? Could you rethink that?
Yeah.
Is there something else you could hear in this? And that to me, once again, it's that moment of humility that comes from realizing the human irony. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the UFO that's part of its message, if it has a message.
Yeah. Another interesting part of that was the idea that technology may be an initiation, and that that we are pursuing technology to its obliterative ends because we have to in order to learn the limits of technology. And I thought that was beautifully put. And then you combine that with your thought earlier in the book that tools in general are part of our cognitive environment. I mean, those two ideas overlapping gave me a lot to think about.
There's the human irony, right? So there's a very important thesis in contemporary cognitive science called the extended mind hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And basically this is Andy Clark again, and David Chalmers, who you've probably heard of.
Yeah.
The extended mind hypothesis basically says that thinking for humans has never just gone on in our heads. It's always been about extending ourselves into our environment, making it an information-rich environment so we can offload our responsibility for cognition onto that environment. Okay. And I'm with Clark and Chalmers on this. I don't think there was a pre-technological moment of distinctive human cognition. Okay. So it's always been an interchange with an environment that we've rigged for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what makes us great. We're constantly creating new Umwelt, overcoming the old Umwelt through our technological extensions. But we're always then going through an apocalypse too, right? Yeah. We're always going through an apocalypse. We're always destroying ourselves and then recreating ourselves through our extensions, right? But now you wonder, are we reaching the ultimate ideal limit of that, whether it be nuclear weapons, whether it be digital technology, what have you, right? Moon Girl doesn't think so, right? Right? I'm unsure,
Yeah. It's potentially, I mean, it's destabilizing no matter what way we consider it. And
there's something you mentioned too, is like you said how, like you have to like go through like kind of go through the moment of technological nihilism to come out the other side of it. Yeah. That's very much Heidegger's thought on this. Like he quotes the poet Hölderlin, where the greatest danger is, there lies the saving hope.
Yeah.
And Heidegger, even for all his moodiness about technology, thought we've got to ride this thing through, because clearly we are being brought someplace new. We're not in charge of things. And so we're going to have to see where this takes us, because there's no putting it back now, nor should we want to.
Yeah. One of the things that talking about the destabilization that might occur when all of this stuff comes out, or if there is a moment where a lot of information is revealed that undermines what our conception of the world is. I look at philosophy as an institution or an edifice, or how how is it going to react? How is academic philosophy going to react to the idea suddenly, if it happens, that we're in an idealist universe rather than being in a materialist universe? Do you think that that's something that can be survived, or is that going to be a death knell for what we consider the humanities pursuits? Humanities.
Yeah. Well, so I think, okay, so in terms of idealism, thanks for the effort of some very, important recent people, among whom I would count Bernardo Castro. Mm-hmm. Philosophical idealism it's a respectable position in mainstream analytic philosophy. Okay. Now, here's where I think there'll be a problem is I think, in mainstream academic philosophy, there's this deep fear of religion. Okay. And like Jeff Kripal will talk about this a lot, is that in the humanities in general, where appeal to anything that isn't just a vulgar materialism, there's just a refusal to take it seriously because there's such a fear of coming off as a religious fundamentalist in mainstream secular academia. Okay, so I don't think you're going to see the point of resistance will be, we can't be, like we're going to take seriously idealism or, certain brands of anti-realism, something like that. Those are already there. All right. It's the idea that we're going to have to take seriously anything that doesn't fit into nice, neatly packaged Enlightenment secularism. Right. And I'm not saying like UFO is going to support religion or anything like that, but the point is like, I think all these things get dismissed because in academia today, anything that has the smell of religion at all is going to be problematic in many ways. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now, whereas I teach at a very religiously conservative school. Okay. So I'll have like the inverse problem. Anything that doesn't smell of religious orthodoxy could be problematic. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that like is going to be so destabilizing with the UFO is it doesn't really please either side of the ideological divide in the West today. Right. Like militantly secular people are not going to like this, and militantly religious people are not going to like this. Right. But maybe they could be united in their hatred of us. I don't know.
Because basically it's undermining both of their notions, right? I mean, so there's not going to be like one side's a victor. They're both going to be homeless.
and this is why I think Kripal's been on your show, right?
Yeah, he has. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
my first interview, my first major interview.
Really?
Yeah,
wow. Good
I wish I knew then what I know now, but hopefully I'll talk to him again.
Get him back.
Yeah.
So Jeff's work has been very, as you can see in the book, I cite him quite a bit.
Yeah.
His work is very helpful to me on this. And his notion of super nature is, it's not supernatural, it's super nature. It's to say nature is super. So he's not saying like he thinks this stuff is an interruption in nature, but he's also not saying he thinks the world's just a bunch of like mindless atoms bouncing around, right? Nature is super, right? I think it's that third category, that thing that makes us rethink all of our boring categories is what we need now, right? And that will be the challenge, is to not let this get sucked into either side of the ideological divides in academia and to keep it in a new thing.
Yeah. For your students, and I mean, I would even go for your own kids, how can young people or people on the just beginning of their intellectual journey, how would you advise them to prepare themselves? I mean, you just wrote a book about thinking. Is there a way that people can approach the world that is going to be more, amenable to these kinds of upsets, or are we just going to be left to it?
So my kids are lucky because they have a weirdo dad. Right? So,
yes, well,
we good for you. We homeschool our kids till 8th grade, and then we send them to high school.
Yeah.
And so for my homeschool kids, they just grew up listening to me listen to UFO podcasts and all that stuff while I'm making lunch every day, right? So it would take much to shock them, right?
Yeah.
But I do think though the key for young people is don't let yourself get stovepiped, right? Like make sure you don't dismiss anything as just weird. Yeah. Right. Like go ahead, listen to the podcast, right? Read a book or two, right? That's outside of what that you think is weird that you wanted to dismiss. I think it'd be a good habit for everybody, every year should read at least one book that they would have dismissed out of hand before they read it.
Yeah.
Right. Or, or just start listening to a podcast that like of something that you think is crazy and see, and you're not going to be brainwashed, right? You're going to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe dig a little deeper than you would have otherwise.
Yeah.
So you're the Heideggerian connection to your to technology. I mean, that is so alien to what our approach has historically been in society these days. How should that affect how we do? I mean, like we just recently had this OpenAI situation where the CEO got canned, and Elon Musk, I think today was quoted in the New York Times saying we're 3 years away from a general intelligence. Without being Luddites or without being fear-mongering about AI, how should we set limits, do you think? Is that something that we should be thinking about now, or is it already too late?
Yeah. As a matter of public policy or something like that, I have no idea.
Okay.
Right. And I think probably if it's trickling down to people like you and me now, it's probably already been in the works for some.
Right.
That's my impression of things.
Yeah.
That this is probably part of a slow rollout of what happened 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. I have no inside information on that. It's just my general take on the way this stuff works. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But maybe more important, like what do you and I do as human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we do have to fight to maintain some sort of non-tech space in our lives, right?
Yeah.
In as much as there is such a space for humans, right? I'm not a throw your cell phone out guy, right? I'm not, don't use GPT guy. Okay. But I do think we cannot allow like what's truly humane in our lives to be replaced by something else. Right. And I know this is like hackneyed, but go outside and go for a walk, right? Like make sure you're having interaction with like tactilely present human beings, right?
Yeah.
Right. Take up an art, right? I think because even though we are like humans are always overcoming, we're always like ruining our Umwelt to replace it with another one. That's just what's always been going on. There are certain, I think, basic human things that we cannot lose touch with, like being able to do things with our hands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Being
Absolutely.
in that conversation. Yeah. And I think all of our task is to find space for that in our lives. Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to your previous answer. It's like don't lose touch with the aspects of our mind and our bodies and our environment that absolutely anchor us to the here and now in this Umwelt, I guess.
Yes.
Yes. I think it kind of goes along with some of the notions that you discussed in the book about the Gaia hypothesis. Like maybe what we're encountering in the Uber Umwelt is actually the evolving consciousness of our entire planet, And these are all things that we should keep in mind as potential possibilities and maybe stop before marrying the AI bride or whatever.
Right. And once again, though, that is not to say that I think we're going to stop the direction of history or something like that.
No, yeah, I think that we're all kind of just along for the ride at this point, and we'll see where it goes.
I agree.
Yeah,
and that goes back to my point. Is like I can't look forward to that, but I also can't rue it either. It's the moment we're in.
It's just going to be what it's going to be, and we're all in the process of becoming.
And I think this is an important point from Heidegger, and I emphasize this in the book is, Heidegger says technology is a destiny. And the way I read that is he's basically saying our technologies become hyperobjects that are basically running us now. They're like alien powers now that are running us.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But for Heidegger, though, so what's the problem with technology? It gives us the illusion that we run the world. Okay.
Yeah, exactly right.
If we admit technology is a destiny, we're implicitly admitting we don't run the world anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's the saving power within the greatest danger. It's like by admitting that we've let a genie out of the bottle that we can't control, it's reminding us that this wasn't our show in the first place.
Yeah, it goes back to the initiation idea. It's like you encounter your own limits by pursuing something to its end.
And then maybe we can listen for something else that might be trying to talk to us, that maybe has always been trying to talk to us, or maybe once spoke to us and we lost ears to hear it. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the ideas that intrigues me is that maybe we've once listened to it and we're intimate with it, and now we've lost that ability. I mean, you read Plato or Aristotle, and you're like, they're talking about something, and it almost seems like they have a level of knowledge that is empirical rather than just being, out of their heads. But we can never, you can't go back in time. We don't know, but it kind of adds to the mystery.
There's that incredible passage from Aristotle that I quote in the book where he says, our ancestors had this great insight.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then it got co-opted into these silly myths, right? And now I've arrived at it again through my cosmology.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But he does seem to think that there's this experience of some kind of revelation, right?
Yeah.
But then but in the interim, he thinks we've lost it, right?
Yeah. Well, and he's exactly where we are. That's exactly what we're doing. You know, we're looking back at his thing. Maybe he had to.
Yeah. Well, think of where Aristotle exists. He exists at a moment in the collapse of Athens, right? You know, where it's starting to come undone. The Umwelt that was the comfortable Umwelt of classical Greeks is coming undone. And I think he's saying, hey, I kind of wish these voices would show up again.
Yeah. And maybe they are.
Maybe they are. Yeah. And that's the thing. And so I'll say this is like, as you read the book, I give you no resolution.
Yeah, no, that's one of the beauties of it, I think, for me.
Yeah.
Beware people with answers.
Yeah. Well, because I think the point is we're not going to resolve this. We need to learn to listen again.
Yeah. Get back in tune. That's all I have for you. I appreciate it.
Excellent, man.
Yeah,
excellent.
No, this is a great conversation. I am privileged to talk to you. You obviously know a ton about all of this stuff and have done a lot of research. And just encountering the ideas and draping them over, that's just like I get chills in these conversations. So I appreciate all your hard work. Well, thank you.
You did a good job. You talk to cool people. I mean,
I know exactly right. No, it is, and that's what I love about it. And they're all on the furthest edge of things that we all like to wrestle with, but maybe they have a little bit more developed perspective. So. All right, sir. Well, I appreciate your time.
You bet. It was my honor, and anytime I'd be happy to come back and talk.
Okay, great. I'll take you up on that too.